should engage in publicly suggesting and pressing for policy and law changes on political topics, such as immigration, gun violence, climate change, etc.? If yes, to what extent and how would you involve diocese's clergy and laity? What would this kind of leadership look like for you? And would you expect to collaborate with other bishops?
This is what I'm calling the essay question. It is very important for any church leader, but for bishops in particular, to really work with policy and law changes. And the topics we're dealing with are quite difficult. I want to talk a little bit about my experience with a couple of these places, especially working in Idaho's Canon to the Ordinary. As you can imagine, the political situation in Idaho looks a little bit different than it does in parts of California. And when I moved from the Diocese of Northern California to Idaho, I had to get used to a different situation. You can imagine that one of the most controversial topics has to do with gun violence in Idaho, because guns are something that are used for hunting, but there's a strong feeling about guns. So one of the things that happened was that in one of our parishes, I got an email from the priest saying, the parish, we need to talk about concealed weapons. We need to talk about what to do with this. And so what I did, and this goes to the part of the question of how I would handle some of this, was that I sent his question out to the clergy in the diocese and to the senior wardens. And I said, tell me how you feel about this. And I laid out a few questions. And they responded. And you can imagine, maybe, that the responses were all over the map on the topic. So I collated the responses and I sent them out to everyone that I had sent the question to and said, people, I want you to use your best judgment, what shows the best type of leadership, what will help people to stay worshiping in your community. And you need to decide according to your context. I say that because I think there are many things on which we would not necessarily agree, even though we think we might. And we need to be careful about pulling the discussion in around all of us so that we can make good decisions. Where's the question? I would absolutely collaborate with other bishops on some of these topics, because these topics, there are wiser people in the room. There are people who know more, depending on where they come from or what kind of work they've done, who know more about these topics than maybe I do, or maybe I might know more than somebody else does. But it's the wisdom is how we collaborate and work on it together.
Is demanding. How do you practice self-care? What do you do to renew yourself? Is there anything that we in the diocese could do to support our bishop's self-care?
The role of a bishop is demanding. There's no question about it. As Canon to the Ordinary, sitting as close to the bishop as I do, I can see how demanding that role is. It's also very demanding for the Canon to the Ordinary, which is the perspective that I can speak from on this. What I do is, because I'm on the road so much, I travel a diocese that is 10 hours from the border with Eastern Oregon all the way over to Wyoming, where I have a parish right at the foot of the Tetons. So that's 10 hours. If weather is good, if I can drive the speed limit, And if I don't need a rest stop, I just stop for gas. Well, that never happens, right? So these are some very, very long drives. Part of my self-care is making sure that my car is in really good shape, that my tires are appropriate for the weather. And I listen to podcasts to keep my mind going and engaged, and I chew gum when I'm driving, because it keeps you awake, right? I don't drive when I'm tired, or at least I try not to, and I make sure that I have plenty of time to get to where I need to be, so that I've got a good half-hour, buffer in there. But in the morning, for example, when I'm on the road or when I'm at home, I get up 2 hours before I need to be anywhere. I grab my cup of coffee, I sit in a chair, I pull up Lectio Divina on my phone, because what I do is I pull up forward day by day the readings of the day, and I choose one. And I just sit there with it and pray that reading. And that shapes my day, which is very important. During the day, I stay pretty focused and pretty busy. But if I happen to come home at night, then I am so fortunate that my husband has spent the past 15 years greeting me, sitting down with me in the living room, sometimes offering me a glass of wine and saying, tell me about your day. And that is a gift, because that allows me to decompress. And then we can cook dinner together, we can go walk the dogs, we can play frisbee, throw the balls, and just have a great time with them. And that really helps to keep me going. I also get my hair cut, and I get a pedicure and a manicure. I do those kinds of things to make sure that I allow plenty of time for that. You can probably tell that I'm a very, very hard worker. And I love my work. But I need to be able to take my Sabbath time, and I need to be able to be a person. So I'm not the kind of person who would sleep in a miter, for example, right? I seriously would need your support to make sure that I maintain my self-care and that I am able to continue on this job for a very long time.
El Camino Real has a large, vibrant Latinx community, which is a rapidly growing part of our diocese. Some face challenges around language, poverty, and access to appropriate theological training, especially for ordination. How would you engage, include, and support this community in all of its diversity?
I am so fortunate that I did grow up in Latin America and that I am bilingual. It makes a big difference for me. When I was rector of St. Matthew's in Sacramento, I had a parish that was multicultural and multilingual. We had a large Latino community, and so we were bilingual all the time. I mean, it was just, that was the way it was. Many of the people in our Latino community were just a couple days, a few days across the border when they came to us. And they were people, they needed food and clothing and shelter. And so the Latino community that was present would welcome and recognize the newcomers and help them to find their way into having the resources that we needed. And we offered a lot of resources as well. But one of the things when it comes to looking at leadership in the Latino community, it's important to have leaders who can lead people appropriately in the context from which they come. They are relational, right? They can get along. But there's a huge challenge, because fairly often those leaders who really could be great ordained leaders face some obstacles that you and I did not face. They are very, very hardworking, yet they would not be able to simply drop everything and leave their families and go on weekend to a formation program. I run a local formation program, and we've talked about this, and it's really, really difficult to be able to find a way of doing this for our Latino leaders. So I was talking with someone about this today, and we really have to be creative around this. And I don't know the one answer, because I don't think there's one. I think there's a whole bunch of answers. But I can tell you that one model that I saw was in Cuba that I really appreciated. The situation in Cuba is incredibly difficult. And this is what happened, though. In order to raise up leaders to be formed, the whole community would support the leader and take care of their family so that the leader could get the training that they needed. That meant feeding and clothing the family, taking care of children, whatever was needed. And the community would buy the books, right, for this leader so that they could get the training. These are all essential pieces. This particular model is so important because in the Latino community, the leader does not go off by themselves. They are part of the community. They are part of the family of God's people. And so whatever different types of models we use need to be able to recognize that. I wish I had the perfect solution, but I think the perfect solution is probably many.
What do you think would be the most important quality or skill for the next Bishop of El Camino Real to possess?
I think if I were to use one word, it would be connection. I think the bishop needs to be a good connector. That involves communication, it involves relationship, it involves being available. It's you know, in a diocese like this one, even though you're not as you're not as widespread as I think you think you are, but there are some distances between parishes, right? There's the part in the south, the San Luis Obispo deanery, that sits down there a little bit further, and there's a kind of a disconnect that happens right there, or can happen, if there's not intentionality around connecting. What I like to do is I like to connect with people one-on-one, face-to-face. That's the first thing that I do. It's automatically for me to do that. And frankly, no one has ever said that I'm unavailable. That's not my style. I naturally connect. So that's something that's important. So that one-on-one. But then the other piece is making sure that parishes, communities, congregations connect between each other. That there's an awareness of what is happening, so that when I come to you, I can say, oh, you know, the parish up in Los Altos is doing this. That's like what you're doing. You guys should talk. Having those connections are very important. That's what unites us. There's another connection culturally that's very important, and because it really does help to be able to move between cultures with some ease, and to help people to greet each other and encounter each other. Because, frankly, language is usually not our barrier, right? It's are we willing to connect with our hearts is really where it's at. So that's another piece that's really important. I also think that it's important to remember that the Diocese of El Camino Real is also connected to the dioceses that sit right around it, right? So San Joaquin, Los Angeles, what's north? California. Well, all of that diocese. Though it's important to connect with all of the dioceses around, but go beyond that and recognize that there are connections that you already have that are global. You have connections in Honduras, you have connections in Africa, you have connections in different places, and then go beyond that. And and recognize the possibility to connect way further. So I think it's really important for the bishop to not only be the connector, but to provide the vehicle for connection and maintain that so that we always are part of a larger body of Christ.
Okay, I dropped my card, so you will tell me if I repeat a question. Many Episcopal parishes are in a position of needing to recalculate.
We already did this one.
Sense of humor, thank you. Many Episcopal parishes are in a position of needing to redevelop their practices, emphasis, and perhaps their mission in order to be sustainable. What part do you think the bishop and the diocese should take in this redevelopment? Do you see this only as a money problem, or is there also a failure of leadership in the church?
So I'm going to take the last question first. No, I don't see this only as a money problem. And yes, there is somewhat of a failure of leadership in the church. What you're really talking about is looking at our strategic plans. And I'm not just using language. I'm really talking about how do we need to look at our parishes in the context in which they exist, the communities they serve, and make sure that this makes sense. This makes sense. Sometimes we might have a great idea, and the great idea is we're going to have a lunch program, and that lunch program is going to feed all these people because it's a good thing to do. But sometimes we might be surprised if that doesn't work. Maybe an outside person with another pair of eyes can say, well, but where those people are is 5 blocks away. They're not going to come to you to be fed. You might want to take those sack lunches over there. Sometimes, we get a great idea and it's stuck in the way that we see it, and so those outside eyes are really important. In the Diocese of El Camino Real, you have 2 canons who are fully capable of doing this type of work and do this type of work. And you have other people, I believe, who have this skill as well, who may not have been tapped to do this kind of work. But we have to maintain those people who can go around and take a look at stuff, because this is some of the work that I do with parishes, and it's really, really important work. I believe that as bishop, it is my job to make sure that the resources for taking good, hard looks at our communities, our contexts, and the way that we serve those contexts, that those resources remain available, and in fact are developed even more. I can bet, and I don't want to add to your workload, Kelsey, but I can bet you that if you had Kelsey come in and take a look at something you might be thinking of, with her ability to innovate and seize opportunity and look at things with a totally different lens, you'd have a good read on some of the stuff that you're doing. And I said that in another room, by the way, so it's not just limited to here, just because you're here. So that's really important, those outside eyes. Now, this is actually a huge topic that we're talking about, and it involves process, it involves people being willing to engage in conversation, it involves people being willing to walk around the neighborhoods, it involves a whole piece. So this is great work, and it sounds to me from the question as though there are some people who, if they haven't engaged in this kind of work, really want to.
All right, hopefully this is the last one. What are the most important moral issues facing America today? And what should be the role of the Episcopal Church and Episcopalians in addressing them? Are you aware of the public policy network recently established among the 6 dioceses of California? How would you encourage and participate in this group?
The public policy network really has a farther reaching effect than I think people necessarily might realize. When those 6 bishops of the state of California got together and are issuing statements and letters that has a ripple effect. When they do that, what that allowed me to do in Idaho was to read what they were saying and take a look at that and see which parts of it might reinforce some of the work that we are trying to do in Idaho. So I just want you to know that it has it's not just you guys, right? It's actually a further reaching piece. You know, I think we are in a really interesting time. But it's not the first time human beings in this world have been in this kind of an interesting time. So I'm going to take you back biblically, actually. When you look at the time before Jesus was walking in Palestine and in Galilee, the people who were of those areas were in a really bad spot. Their area had been conquered and reconquered. There were all kinds of different forces coming in, and the people were being tossed to and fro with all kinds of requirements being put on them, things they didn't believe in, all kinds of stuff going on. And it was a complicated picture. If you look at what was happening, it had been that people had felt before as though they had a direct line to God. Direct line to God, direct line to neighbor. And it was clear for them. But as the forces of humanity and other forces took over, it started to feel like for people as though they were pushing up against something and they couldn't break through and see God very easily. What that meant was that the question of hope was an important question. So we as the church are in that position of being the ones who can break through that and point. We point to God, we point to hope. We do what the presiding bishop is doing, in fact. He's pointing to love, right? And that's not simple. It's a simple word with a very complex thing, and it's really important. Pointing to love. So as leaders in the church, as the Episcopal Church, that's what we need to do. Our communities, our people outside the doors of the church, our people in the universities, on the campuses, they're looking at us. And they're saying, are you guys going to point that way? And what they respond to is when we point to love. That's what they're looking for. And we have that charge. So I would just say to you, don't be afraid. Be brave about pointing to love. And be brave about talking about that with people around you. Because this is a really important time to be church.
Well, that's the end of our time.
No, other questions?
No, we're at 10:10.